week 8 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few wide receivers. I have his sleeper plays this week. The first guy, Brandon Powell of the Minnesota Vikings. So this Minnesota Viking team, what a victory it was on Monday Night Football, upsetting the San Francisco 49ers. And Brandon Powell, he had the best game of the season for himself. 4 catches, 64 yards on 5 targets, and a carry, 5 yards. So Powell right now, number 3 wide receiver behind KJ Osborne, Jordan Addison, who's really turning things up over the last few weeks. And Powell is a slot guy. It's pretty solid for a Kirk Cousins type offense that wants to spread you out anyway and go 4 or 5 wide. So Powell, ever since he's had the expanded roles, had 2 solid games. Week 5 versus the Chiefs, the 4 catches, 43 yards. Then week 6 is Chicago, a down game, 3 catches, 20 yards. And then, like I mentioned, in the past game here versus the Niners, 4 catches, 64 yards. So right now with a decent matchup with the Green Bay Packers in a game with potential mid-20s to low 30s type of scoring between these two teams, I think Brandon Powell, once again, in deeper leagues is a flex option or a number 3 receiver in 3 receiver leagues. Could be a sleeper this week, available in 98% of fantasy leagues. The next receiver is Jauan Jennings of the San Francisco 49ers. I believe Jennings filled in pretty well for Deebo Samuel in last week's tough loss versus the Minnesota Vikings. Catches 54 yards on 9 targets. Deebo, once again, most likely going to sit out for this 49er team where they got a bye in week 9, so it makes sense. Week 8, he sits out. Deebo comes back in week 10 after the bye in week 9. So Jennings, over the last few seasons, we've seen flashes from him. Right now, he's available as well in 98% of fantasy leagues. He's been the number 2 receiver when Deebo's been out. And last week, he had a solid game. And once again, this week here versus a Bengal defense, which isn't all that great in the secondary, I think he could be a decent option this week. And the third and final wide receiver I have as a sleep is Mecole Hardman of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Hardman back with Kansas City after getting traded from the New York Jets to the Chiefs. And Hardman last season, he had a great year until he went down with injury for this Chiefs team as a burner. And a guy could run some gadget plays as well. So last week, he didn't really see the field at all was Hardman. 1 catch, 6 yards, and 3 targets. But this week in the matchup at a division foe, he's very familiar with the Denver Broncos and getting back up to speed in this playbook over there in Kansas City. I think Hardman, he could be a diamond in the rough type of play in fantasy leagues. I know a few people went out there on the waiver wire after getting traded back to the Kansas City Chiefs last week. Right now, available still is Hardman in 85% of fantasy leagues. And the Chiefs, they need receivers to step up. Rashee Rice pretty much has been the only guy who's been consistent this season. And maybe Hardman could be that number 2 or 3 option. So right now, if you need a deep sleeper option, Hardman is the guy this week. So that's a few wide receivers I have as sleepers for week 8 of the fantasy football season.